And I will call the June 25th, 2024 meeting of the Southborough Historical Commission to order, noting it is 7:02 p.m. And present, besides myself, Kevin Miller, our Vice Chair, Annie Pfaff, Grant Farrington, Dan Blanchard, and Michelle Hokinson. And joining us for our first item of business is Select Board Member Andrew Dennington, who's here to talk with us about the granite post and iron rail fencing around the common. As you all know, this is something that we've discussed on multiple occasions. And Andrew and I have had a number of conversations about this. We walked there's Jim. So Jim Balaschke has joined us. But Andrew and I have had conversations about this. We toured the OBG and the common where the fence surrounds, of course. What was that, last summer, Andrew, I think?
Yeah.
It's been a while. And, I've had conversations with Ben Smith about this. I've chatted with Bill Cundiff on the subject. And so, and the select board has discussed this a number of times, but Andrew is here tonight to kind of talk to us about his thoughts on it. And, we're very interested in moving forward on this, particularly in light of the coming tricentennial and the desire that I think is very widely shared to get things in tip-top condition in the town center, and trying to take these things one at a time. The fence around the common, which vitally needs attention right away, is in a way low-hanging fruit with regard to CPA funding, we think. And so, Andrew, I just want to turn it over to you and get your thoughts on the matter.
Yes, thanks, Kevin. So thanks for having me here this evening. You've had a very descriptive summary on the agenda of what I was looking to discuss here, which is to see whether the select board could work together with the historical commission in submitting an application to the CPC for CPA funding for the restoration of the railing around the town common by the August 31st, 2023 deadline, 2024 deadline for consideration of CPA projects that would be considered at the annual town meeting in March of 2025. So this is something that we've talked about on and off for a long time. I think it would be great if we have all this work done by the time of 2027 when the tricentennial celebration is here. I think those of you that have been there recently know the condition of that railing right around the town common, which borders it up to the north, is in really poor condition. So Kevin and I have had some emails with Bill Cundiff about this. I've also spoken with Ben Smith about this, and I mentioned this when I went to the CPC public forum a couple weeks ago and mentioned it to the CPC. So the basic information that, as I have the application in front of me, there's a pretty short narrative of what we would be looking to do. You have to state an amount of funds that is requested, and I learned today, fortunately, that we don't need to have a completely bid out project. We don't need to have a firm number. And that's also helpful because in order to put the project out to bid, we need to have engineering funds spent in order to get some designs to put it out to bid. And we'd really prefer to have that also come out of the CPA funding. So another thing that we've talked about, which would make this maybe a little bit more complicated, is while a contractor was there restoring the railing, to see if they could also do some work to restore some of the, I don't know what the term for this is, but in the old burial ground, there's some family graves that are kind of together, and they would be bounded by some stone and ironwork, which is kind of a little bit similar, but much, much smaller than the town common railing. So, just the idea, and this, I didn't really get into any detail with Bill about this when I spoke to him today, is maybe an add alt. So that's an add alternate. That's a procedure where when you put something out to bid, you're requiring a bid price on the base project, and then you're inviting the bidders to, if they want to, submit an additional price, which would cover not only that base work, but also the additional optional work. So in this case, that would be the base work would be the town common railing, and the additional alternate, the additional work would be the work in the burial ground. Two things that I mentioned, that I saw on the application that kind of bear on the historical society. There's the historical commission there's a flow chart that determines whether your project qualifies for CPA funding. And I see that there's a question: is the resource on the state register of historic places? I believe, Kevin, is the answer to that question a yes, or?
Yes, it is. Yes,
Okay.
it's on the Macris inventory for the town common, and also within the new Southborough Center Historic District that we're going to.
That's what I thought. Okay. And then there's also a question that asks about what have you done to look at alternative funding or additional funding sources, volunteer hours, in-kind donations, grants. I really don't know how to answer that question, but maybe you folks would have some idea. So anyway, those are the issues that I see them, but basically looking to see, thinking of the timing here, if we're going to submit something by August 31st and we're heading into the summer, would be a good idea to come to the historical commission. And I see, I think Sam is in the audience. His expression is to socialize the idea, right? So to see whether you like the idea and might want to partner on submitting the application.
Well, I'm certainly in favor of it, I will say, and it's well known. And I just want to see if any folks on the commission have questions or comments on this. Annie, anything?
I would be supportive of it. I feel like I'm a little bit removed from, everything going on CPC these days. So maybe Grant has some more insight, but I know that there's been a lot of historical projects like in the past several years. So is there historic funds available for this? And that would be one of my questions. And what other projects might we be up against that, possibly could be, a use for the funds, but in general, I'm very supportive.
Grant,
I think I might be able to answer that quickly.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So for the CPA, the different buckets that are set aside, sets aside 10% of the funds for historical. And those funds are tapped out pretty much with the 3 large bonds on the 84 Main Street, the library, and the townhouse. However, there are additional, so that's only 10% of the total CPA funds, and I believe 65% of the CPA funds can be used for any of the purposes: recreation, open space, housing, or historical. So even though there's not dedicated historical funds available at this time due to the bonding, we do have just kind of general CPA funds that could be potentially applied.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
And
this one strikes me as a much less, controversial kind of historical funding than some of the private projects, or, spending on private property that's been tended to be a kind of lightning rod. To me, this is a public asset in the most public place in town. Go ahead, Grant, though. I think you had something else.
Oh, yeah. I just want to say I'm generally supportive as well. Just because I am on CPC, I likely won't be, if we're taking a vote tonight without having seen an application, I probably won't vote. I'll abstain just for that reason, but I imagine that if it was to come before CPC, I would support it.
Jim, anything?
Yeah, I would say that the fence program is maybe historic. It's been there a long time, but it's also a public gathering area, and it's much more general town infrastructure in the way I see it versus strictly historical. Even if it was considered historical, my suggestion would be to, if Andrew's willing to, help put the application together, run it up the flagpole anyway, because to Annie's point, there may be other things you've got to go up against, but I think it's very worthy, almost against any other project that ought to be considered. So I'd say go for it. Independent of classification, independent of competition, and I support it.
Thanks. Michelle?
Yes, I'm in support of trying to get the funding. And Kevin, I have to tell you that I walk up there all the time and never noticed how bad, well, how poor a condition it is until you pointed it out. And I just can't believe it's been, I mean, it has to have been like that for years.
Yeah, it's really, what happens, of course, is the water gets in the top of those posts. They're bored, the granite is bored out, the cast iron is set, the rings that hold the rods are set in there, and it's all spalled out on many of them. And Andrew and I, when we walk the OBG, the adults he's talking about are these family plots, of course, and some of those are in shockingly and arguably dangerous conditions. So I'm very enthusiastic about Andrew's idea to have that as sort of an adult as part of a bid. I know, Andrew, you probably don't want to get into specific dollar amounts. Suffice it to say, because this was already discussed to some degree on the select board, that the amounts that have been sort of brought forward, without getting into particulars, which probably isn't productive, but have been very wildly divergent. There was an initial number that came forward at a select meeting that was quite low, and I was quick to pounce on it as the preferred. And then Mr. Cundiff, I think, pressed his the construction people he had spoken to about this, and they came back with a exponentially higher figure. I'm ever the optimist, hoping that the reality is somewhere in between. But I think you, Andrew, alluded to the fact that I think Mr. Cundiff is of the view that it needs a kind of engineering analysis so that we get the correct, because it's going to have to be put out to bid as a big ticket item. So that, but you want to put that, as I understand it, the engineering itself, or the consultant, or what, I don't want to misuse any terms, but whatever is required to determine what we need to get proper bids, he wants that as part of the package, right?
Yeah, and that part I'm just a little bit less clear on. Like, my familiarity is with, bidding like the work for the St. Mark's Park, where you needed to have an engineer put together plans that had stormwater specifications and things like that then informed the bids. I don't think something like this would be that involved, but I just don't know.
Right. Yeah, that's sort of my, and many of those posts to me are okay, but again, I'm not an expert. I just know what I see. Dan, you haven't had a chance. Any thoughts here?
I mean, it's a fantastic opportunity to repair a public area that is used extensively. The only two questions I would have is the town then assuming obligation for town plots or family plots in the cemetery? And then the only other one would be railing then continuing for the steps that go down to Main Street.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I think that's a minor.
Yeah, but those are really my only 2 points. But I think living across there, walking my dog through there, I love the idea of seeing it restored.
Right. And I think the issue of family plots is an interesting comment. I think that in general, the town has already taken on the charge of the OBG as a kind of public institution and service. You follow what I'm saying? And that those family plots, I mean, they're quite lovely. I think Andrew, I don't recall if there were 3 or 4 that were, there's something, very small number, only a couple, a handful. And I don't have photos in front of me right now, but I don't think that would add immensely in any way. In fact, if I recall correctly, all those plots, I think the largest maybe is 15 by 20. And generally with one granite post in the four corners and a rail that goes between, or there might, in one or two cases, there might be an additional granite post or two, but we're not talking about a lot. So again, I thought it was a good idea if we can add that on as part of the process. If everybody, the consensus is pretty good for this, I would be, entertain a motion that we support a joint sponsorship with the select board of an application for CPC funding. And I'm sorry, Andrew, if I kind of stole your thunder with my agenda, that we support a joint application with select board to the CPC for CPA funding to restore the fence around the town common.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion on this? Okay, roll call vote. Miller's aye. Annie?
Yes.
Jim?
Aye.
Grant?
Abstain.
Okay, Michelle?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
So that's good. I got to count now. That's 501 in support. So Andrew,
Great, thank you.
we want to go forward and, let's talk about what you need specifically from us in terms of paperwork or
Sure.
research or whatever. And certainly, for instance, the fact that the state views that as a historic asset and is, documented is that's easily, gotten and assembled, and and the rest of it, I or any of us, I'm sure would help put together information that you need.
And then if you know of any, I don't know, other grant programs where you could also ask if they're a source of funds, I'd be grateful if you think of anything.
Yeah, that's a good question. I will, and anybody else in the commission that has a notion on that, I have some thoughts. I don't want to say it at the moment, but there may be at least a fallback option that would help with the application under the status as a historic asset. So I'll look into it.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Andrew. Anything else?
Me.
All right, I'm gonna let you go. You're probably going
Okay.
over to the school discussion now. So
All right.
good luck.
Thanks,
and
Andrew.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Andrew.
Have a good meeting.
Thanks.
All right, let us go on.
Really quickly, Kevin, the only reason why I mention family plots and graves is because there is also a larger, and granted, this is a much bigger conversation for a much larger, maybe in the fall, but there is a lot of work then, if we're gonna do the railing around headstones and we're gonna do a family plot, there's a lot of the work that needs to get done in the old burial ground.
Yes.
We have, and that I think is another piece that needs to be addressed, because yes, we can put a railing around a family plot and replace it, but we have trees growing through headstones. Right, literally breaking headstones apart.
Right.
And I think those are some other issues that need to be, yes, it's great if we can do the railing and then we can do all of these other pieces, but there also needs to be, we continue to talk about the loss of headstones from the storm.
Right.
But we are continuing to lose headstones because we are not taking care of them.
Right. I agree, and that's another conversation that's part of, and the players involved are aware of these issues, trees, that a lot of dead limbs, and I know in the past, I don't know what the current position on this, but in the past, I think there was some reluctance by DPW to do anything but remove deadfall and not to proactively manage the trees in there for fear of putting heavy equipment in there that would damage. So that's a touchy subject. It does need address. I'm aware of it. I'm glad you are. And I think, again, that's something that we need to work on. Also, you know, in the past, the Historical Commission has been involved and superintended the preservation and restoration of stones themselves. And I agree with you that it's due for another round. So it's part of, I mean, in that area, there's so many things that I'm personally trying to get some handle on. We have those signage issues around the common as well, the Common Street signs, the missing James Burke sign, and the milestone that's, you know, gone missing. So yeah, I appreciate you mentioning it. And you know, if I let it slip, bring it up again, because I agree with you, it's important.
Kevin, on that topic briefly, do you know, is the street still misnamed?
Yes.
Okay, it hasn't been fixed.
No.
Okay.
And you know, it's just a matter of chipping away at this stuff one bit at a time. Like, you know, I'm so at the moment I'm so over the moon about, I don't know if you noticed the last poll for the final historic district sign went in yesterday, and I know that Chris Leroy is planning to, they have to wait a couple days for the concrete to set up, but he plans to mount that sign on Thursday. So in other words, before the gathering, which is going to be really nice. So they'll all be up, barring act of God, by Thursday afternoon, which is, I'm so grateful to them, and it's really kind, which actually gets us to some brief notes on this reception that we are having this Thursday, 2 days from now, at 7 o'clock to celebrate the Southborough Center Historic District. I think I sent it to you all that, you know, Beth Malo was nice enough to I wrote an email that I sent, and you saw that because you got it all, to all town boards, committees, commissions, and all town employees, inviting them. And then Beth Malo was kind enough to sort of post a version of that, with some amendments, you know, things that she added, opening and closing the piece, if I recall correctly, promoting it to the rest of the town, because we would like as many people to come as possible. And as I said, you know, the goal of this, in my mind, is to make sure, number one, that we thank everybody, and there are a lot of people to thank. The people in the district themselves who got this going, not least Ray and Michelle Hokinson, it must be said, and fundraising, the neighbors, people that wrote checks, the consultant that the neighborhood group hired that got this going, and then people in the Historical Commission, notably Kate Madison, lots of people in town government that were helpful. And then when we got to the sign portion of it, which is really the only part, you know, that I've had heavy involvement in, there we got, you know, tons of nice help from capital planning, and the ARPA committee, and the select board was very supportive, and all that stuff. So we got a lot of people to thank, and I'm going to make sure that that gets done. B, I'd like to talk a little bit about the history of this, and I'm going to turn to Ray Hokinson, who is also, you know, on the board of the community house where we're going to have this celebration. Full disclosure, husband of Michelle, and also sort of really the guy that wrote the survey that surveyed all the neighbors, and the guy that wrote the checks or collected all the checks, and then made up a big part of the difference when the fundraising was falling a little short, and really pushing this for a long time. But to tell that a little bit of that history, because it's really very interesting. I mean, it's essentially Ray sent out the survey to the neighbors in that was 2011, 2010. I got to double check, 2010. And then, you know, collecting checks and trying to hire a consultant in 2011. And here we are in 2024 with the signs, you know, finally going up and being over the finish line. So it's a long process. It's a good, interesting story about people persevering through some adversity and in some cases some sort of naysaying about the whole project. So there's that, and then and so I am going to ask Ray to sort of tell a little bit of his side of it, because it's actually, like I said, it's quite interesting. But in a way, the real goal of all that is to call attention to people in other parts of town who might be interested in a historic district in their area. Because as I said, I think in the invite, this is the first National Register district in Southborough, but I don't think it should be the last. But it's going to take more than just the Historical Commission, in my view, to get it done. It's going to take a kind of grassroots effort of the kind that really made this center district possible. So part of it is a sense of looking back, thanking, remembering what was done as a way of inspiring people to go forward. Look at tonight, right? We're going to, in a minute or two, then get on to trying to review and approve these historic house signs. We've got applicants from almost every corner of town. We've got 3 from Southville, a couple from Fayetteville, Southborough Center, East Southborough Center, the Brigham Pond area, and the West End. To me, it's really impressive. Of the 10 signs we're going to review, they're actually scattered all over town, and it suggests that there's more possibilities. So anyway, I don't want to run on, and I promise I'm not going to Thursday. But with regard to planning of this, I've principally been talking with Michelle and Annie to try to just work some things out. And this is what we're trying to keep this simple, low cost. I'll get into some budget stuff a little bit later, but we've got plenty of money, but we're not going to spend it because I am a parsimonious taxpayer and I want to give back as much of our annual budget as possible, and we're going to do it. So this party is going to be, I hope, an attractive, fun, happy, hopefully well attended, but simple affair. And the idea, let's say talking with Michelle and Annie, is to kind of keep it to a cake, a very nice cake, by the way, that will look like one of the signs. Hopefully comes out okay. And then sort of Michelle is promising to bake some specialty of hers, fruit, cheese and crackers, light sort of snacks, beverages, alas, of the teetotaling variety, but still tasty, I hope. Coffee, water, other drinks, etc. And some, we hope to display the mock-up of the sign. Annie's working on a poster board. I got some photos of all the locations printed, which came out actually really good. I've gotten the certificate framed, very low dollar amount. All that stuff to try to assemble a nice presentation, some balloons and flowers and, whatever to make it look good. And just to welcome people in and get people chatting about what's been accomplished and maybe what could be done in the future, and have some fun too, on a Thursday night. In and out, we'll get everybody home in time to watch the Biden-Trump debate if they choose. So a brief, happy affair. One thing that and so many thanks to be at the community house for allowing us to use the space, and it should be a lot of fun. Because I had to, I went ahead because of timing and ordered the cake today, in the good hope that you would approve ex post facto doing this. Otherwise, I'll just eat it myself, meaning financially. But what I would actually like is the plan is for me and Marcy to, I think all of you know, to go out and do a whole bunch of shopping on Thursday for all this stuff that we need for it at probably BJ's and or Wegmans, and collect it all, get it home, prepare it, ferry it over to the community house. Michelle's offered to help with that, and Annie might have some time maybe late in the afternoon. And then everybody's just got to show up and be happy. Sound like a plan? So, but what I thought would be helpful to me, I don't expect this to cost much because I'm trying to do it as inexpensively but attractively as possible. I'm guessing the cake, probably $250 for the whole shooting match, maybe less. And we've got plenty of money in the budget. So since I can't give you an exact amount, I can tell you the cake only costs $50. It's a miracle. But to get some sort of vote or authorization from you folks to go, I don't know how this is done, right? I'm still learning on the job, but some authority to go out and spend what I need to spend to buy beverages, coffee, which we're going to make in the urn in the community house. Michelle is giving us plastic knives and forks, but I got to buy some plates and napkins, stuff like that. So does that make sense? I don't have any questions about this. Are you willing to have me shop on your behalf on Thursday and gather this all together?
If you're asking, are we in support of you spending a little bit of our budget for this?
Yeah.
I'd say if you need to take a vote on it, we can. I was even going to say if you want us to volunteer to chip in, we can help. So whatever you think works.
In my view of this, and we've been so good about, as Annie points out, I mean, we haven't spent a penny in like 3 years because the sign program being on hiatus. And I've been over the numbers today about what we have left in ARPA, what we need for the water tower sign, and it's all lining up beautifully. And we're still going to be turning back to the town. My guess would be at least half of our annual budget, which is only $1,000, even with all that and all these house signs. So we've done really, really well. So I think, for us to spend after a 13, 14-year drive to get the National Register District, I think we could spend $200, $250 if it comes to it on some cheese and crackers, basically, without too much guilt.
Can we just approve a budget for it?
You could say maybe if you want to say not to exceed, that would be.
Wouldn't that? I think we can do that now.
Yeah, that's what I would like, because then I would just feel like I had the imprimatur, like I said, because the deadline's on the baking, I had to go order the cake today. But I think, well, $50, if they say no, I'll just, whatever. So do you want to?
Why don't I make a motion on that? I move that we approve a budget of $400 not to exceed for this celebration, with any unused funds returned to the commission's treasury.
Second.
Great, thank you. So the motion made and seconded, maximum $400. I guarantee you it'll be about half that, if that. So thank you. We'll do a roll call vote. I'll vote last on this one. Annie?
Yes.
Jim?
Aye.
Grant?
Aye.
Michelle?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Miller authorizes himself to spend some money. Thank you. That was 6-0. It should be fun. And we'll have, like I said, we'll have the photos. I we'll have information about people that want to go read the report, which is, 80 pages of fun and facts. We'll have the mock-up, we'll have the photos, we'll have the thing that proves we really are in the National Register, which is I mentioned to Annie, is just a single little document they send. And I thought, well, this deserves to be someplace other than my desk drawer. So it'll be in a nice little frame, and hopefully people will, again, come out. And I really hope that, besides I'm hoping to see some of our friends in town government, and some of, Michelle and I live in the district, so some of our neighbors, and especially, the people who were really instrumental in making this thing happen. I'm really hoping that we attract some people from Fayetteville and Corderville, Southville, that, let's say, oh, could this happen in my neighborhood, and we can chat with them about, yeah, it could. And here's what we think it might
As
entail.
far as Fayetteville is concerned, I'm very interested. And I have a lot of neighbors that are really invested, in the history of our, of our street and everything. And, up towards, Village, the Fayetteville Village Hall. So I'm interested, especially in hearing that part of the conversation on Thursday, because obviously all of that work predated my work on the commission. But yeah, just as an anecdote, I'm very interested in someday pursuing this for Fayetteville.
Well, and Michelle, by the by, has, and Michelle and Ray have invited the consultant who did all this work, 12, 13 years ago, and going forward. Where does she live, Michelle? Up in
She
Gloucester?
lives in Gloucester. She lived in Beverly at the time. And my husband contacted her and she's quite excited. She was happy to be invited. And she said it depends on the traffic. But
Right.
I can certainly hand off the information to you because she was the one that really designed the boundaries and said why. So we have all of that information.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be really interesting to hear. So I hope she can make it, but even if not, I think I've got enough of a handle on this at this point and the history. And of course, with Ray and Michelle correcting me whenever I go off the rails, that we can tell, like I said, it's an interesting story, and as Ray and Michelle know, that it involved overcoming some substantial resistance. What I'm hoping is that the success of this thing and those beautiful signs that people are driving by now and noticing, and I am hearing some reaction to that, are going to say, wow, I'd kind of like that for my neighborhood, and that's really the goal. So anyway, let's go on. Review and approve sign proof for a rural cemetery water tower. Well, after some back and forth with our friends at Franklin Bronze, I've gotten, do you remember we done all this research and figured out when it was built was easy. When it was taken out of commission and superseded by the municipal water system was way, way harder to figure out. And I finally did. It was 1933. I brought you some draft language at our last meeting. I'm going to share my screen now. And you guys had some suggestions. And here's what it now looks like now that I've got it back from our friends at Franklin. Here is there, and I had them do sort of two options. We wanted, again, not to have that National Register shape. It doesn't make sense on the door, one of the doors of the water tower. You were in favor of a more rectangular shape. And we talked about the wording, and this is what we came to, one version, and I've got one other to show you. Now, bear in mind that just like the National Register signs, they look way better in person. I chatted with Bill Cundiff, our DPW superintendent this afternoon, and he was saying, man, those things look great. They really are really high quality, nice signs. And so I remember the mock-up looking kind of like this. They're sort of glossy and shiny, and they look so much richer in person, but this is how the basics.
Kevin,
This
would
would
you mind sharing it again?
Can you see it?
Mm-mm.
You can't.
Is that just me?
Can everybody else see the?
I can see the option A.
Yeah, I've just got one up there right now.
Okay, maybe it's something on my end. Sorry about that.
No worries. I'll try to move it over a little bit. See, is that better for you?
Oh, I see. I was accidentally viewing only attendees instead of, or only participants instead of the some Zoom setting. Sorry about that.
Okay, no worries. So this again, this is the language that we talked about, and you know, it's a pretty straightforward, simple. This would be 10 or 11 by 14. Where is my number on this? Yeah, there it is. 14 by 10, 14 wide, 10 inches tall. And there it is, Rural Cemetery Water Tower, built in 1903. Prior to the laying of municipal water pipes in the cemetery in 1933, a windmill pumped well water to a holding tank in this tower to provide irrigation to the grounds in summer. Southborough Historical Commission. Clean, simple, straightforward. You see what the price there. By the way, there are two options for mounting that we have to make a decision on. And this is actually why I called Mr. Cundiff this afternoon, because I wanted his input if he had any on this. One is a pin and hex wood screw is a screw that's supplied to you with a very special tool that prevents people from even attempting to remove the screws. It's like one of these anti-tamper. You sometimes see them on like subway cars. The screws are put in so people don't, you know, monkey with the rails screwed to the floor while they're boredly riding the green line or something. So with the pin and hex wood screws add about $20 or $18 to the cost. So that, again, it's right around the number. Again, when I had gone to the select board to ask for money on this, I guessed and said $500, and it turned out to be like astounding, like Karnak worthy right on my guess. So that's the one option. The other option I had them prepare was, if you recall, Dan had raised the question of whether we should name the person who built it. And we know who that is. His name is George Cantello. So in this version, it simply adds the subordinate clause, built by George Cantello. You can see in the third line of the descriptive text. Otherwise, it's the exact same sentence. Prior to the laying of municipal water pipes in the cemetery in 1933, a windmill pumped well water to a holding tank in this tower, built by George Cantello to provide irrigation to the grounds in summer. I will note that George Cantello is in fact buried in the rural cemetery. So he might be pleased. Yeah, Michelle.
Question, why is this one cheaper?
Because and I will give the answer to that excellent question, is because the pin and hex mountings are more expensive. This option, and the mounting options are interchangeable with the language. You know what I mean? We could have pin and hex mounting with this one. We could have, you see that option B with rosettes in red at the top for the other one. In this version, it gets mounted with big, heavy wood screws that they supply. And then if you look in the four corners of the sign, see those little, they don't look that attractive in the mock-up, but they're rosettes that are attached with epoxy over the screw heads that cover them. You know, you've seen that on other signs, these kind of cool looking there's something sort of vaguely floral covers to the screw heads. So this one is more and they don't show the pin and hex, they just show an empty hole here. But the pin and hex wood screws are, again, tamper-proof. If you really are concerned about security per se, whereas the other one, which I've now lost and will never find again, there it is. The rosettes to me are a little bit more attractive, but there is, and this is what I discussed with Mr. Cundiff. I said, well, are we worried? I said, I don't think of the rural cemetery as exactly a high crime area. And it's not like, people who are engaged in copper theft, who strip wires out of houses and steal people's gutters. You can't exactly walk into a smelter, and offer up an ill-gotten rural cemetery water tower sign. So he didn't particularly seem to think it was a security risk, but he finally, he said, it's up to you, whatever you want to do. Again, the pin and hex is not unattractive. I think the rosettes are a little bit nicer. As it turns out, if you get the rosettes, that's included in the price of the sign. The pin and hex throws it up another $20. So,
Kevin.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's okay.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, I think I prefer the language without adding in the extra phrase. Just reading it, I think I don't know, something about, well, first of all, I think it's just simpler without it, but also just having that extra phrase, I think makes the sentence not flow as well. There's kind of like a lot of like dangling, comma this, comma that. So I prefer the language without adding the name.
The old subordinate clause always slows it down. There's no doubt about it. But I wanted to throw that in again, because, Dan had asked, I think, for us to look at that version with that way. Is there other sentiment? Can we just go around and I just get your opinion on, again, with or without Mr. Cantello, who I promise will remember regardless. And anybody interested could, read the Macris report on it. But that's the Cantello-less option. And this is the Cantello'd option. Annie, do you have thoughts on this?
I'm a little torn. I would agree with Grant that it doesn't read as well with George's name included, but by the principle of it, I like the idea of including the name. I think that adds to the historic nature of why we're putting a sign on there. So I could go either way, but if I had to choose, I would probably say option B with his name included.
With included. Okay. Is Jim?
I'm here.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I couldn't see you.
That's right. I kind of agree with what Annie said. I think it's a bit more personal, if you want to say that, a little more accreditive to put George's name in there versus a amorphous committee. So I like this one better with his name.
Okay. Thank you. Michelle.
I agree. I feel that, as a historic commission, it sort of tells a little bit of a story, and I feel that the architect needs to be credited.
He is actually the guy who put the stones down.
Oh.
So
he definitely needs to be credited.
Yeah, I think in a way, I think it's kind of a cool story that the guy's buried in the cemetery that he built the tower to help keep green. It's sort of a sweet affair. Dan, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, we can continue to look at I agree with Grant in that it is, it's a mouthful. But in terms of connecting it to the history and to the story of the city or the town, right? History is an intensely personal process, right? And the more we can connect history with the people who made it, and the more we can advertise that, I think it's really important. And so the same way that we approach the signs for houses and how intentional we are with about making sure that we're doing the right thing with who and how the names are attached to those historic signs, I think we also need to do that here and in other projects that will come up inevitably, where we have to make sure that people understand that, right? It's a water tower that was, it's a, right? Something that existed for 3 decades, right? It's still standing, but it was functional for 3 decades, right? What's special about it, right, is in part who built it, but also why it was built.
Mhm.
And if we have the ability to do that, I think that that's part of our responsibility as we approach it. I agree that we could look at different language, right? But I think including his name on it honors him for the intention of what it was built for.
Yeah, I don't personally, I mean, I don't know. I don't think 4 extra words drags the sentence down all that much. It's not some Henry James, late Henry James 38-line sentence. It's a 37-word sentence. So I would also be in favor of giving Mr. Cantello his due, even if it slightly dims any remote music that might have been in there in the sentence.
Okay,
It's granted, it looks like the wind is blowing against you slightly on this one.
that is fine. I will be voting for it regardless, so.
Okay. Well, you guys, so there's that. And now is there feeling on the pin and hex mounting versus, I hate to be in the weeds on this, but the pin and hex mountings versus the regular screws with the rosettes? I mean, I had this theft. I thought, but if somebody wants to steal a bronze sign, they could just go lop off one of the new, not to hope this happens, one of the new National Register signs and get a lot more bronze. You know what I mean? Like, am I having, in other words, ridiculous? It was an option that the Foundry offers, so I just wanted to make sure that I touched all my bases. Jim, you look like you have something.
Yeah, the rosettes are just decorative, right?
Yes, they're put on over the top of the screw heads with epoxy.
Oh, put on top of, okay.
Yeah, they kind of cover. They're like, think of them as like hubcaps. They sort of mount over top and cover the screw head.
Well, I was going to say, why can't we combine it? Why can't you use a Torx type anti-tamper screw and then put the rosette on top of that?
I'll tell you why, because the pin and hex screws have a bowl top, and so you can't put rosettes over them. It's like a panhead screw, trying to put a flat disc over a panhead screw.
Well, but they do make Torx and other style fasteners that are flathead countersunks type screws.
I don't know, but this is what they told me. You can't use the rosettes with the other kind of mounting. You have to make a decision.
A screw, you'd have to choose a different type of screw, but it's a small thing. I agree. I don't think it's much of a theft risk.
I think I personally, if you want the chair's opinion, would be just to go with the wood screws and the rosettes. I think, again, this is not, I don't see it as a big risk. So any other thoughts on that? So basically we'd get exactly what you're looking at here, but again, in reality, it's way nicer looking. It's that pebbly finish. It's the other elements, by the way, in terms of font and background finish, is made to harmonize with the National Register signs. You follow? So I'm trying to keep in the same zone, even though we didn't want to use that shape, obviously, here. And we didn't want to use the town seal, which is what's featured on the National Register sign. So, but if we went with the regular screws and the rosettes, that's what you would get. That's what it would cost, $504.80. And again, no prize for me for estimating within, what is that? Less than 1%?
Mhm.
500.
It seems like we're on board. Should we move this to a vote?
If everyone's okay with that, somebody make a motion.
And move that we approve the rural cemetery water tower sign proof, including language recognizing George Cantello and with the rosette mounting options.
Seconded,
Option, sorry.
seconded.
Brilliantly done, Grant, and seconded by Jim. Roll call vote. Miller is aye. Annie,
Yes.
Jim,
Aye.
Grant,
Aye.
Michelle,
Yes,
Dan.
Yes,
I cannot tell you how grateful I am to all of you for that 6-0 vote, and we've gotten this done, and just in time. It had to be done tonight. Thank you, my everlasting thanks. That's a good one. I really think that's going to be a nice thing. I can't wait till that goes up and people start seeing it on their walks and talking about it and figuring out, learning what that was. Because I said, I've heard some kind of crazy tales of what people thought it was. And so now they'll know, which is cool.
Kevin, as you know, I've got a hard stop. Would you like to juggle a bit and have me give a 90-second update on Tricentennial before I have to go?
I would be happy to. So we're going to jump to 7B on members' reports and have Jim tell us what he knows about Tricentennial.
It's been, the short story has been proceeding with regular sessions every 2 weeks, active group. We've come up with a, you know about the survey already. The survey is up to 75 responses, 178 pages, although that's almost like 2 or 3 pages per person, but a lot of data, a good trough of potential volunteers to help out with it. We are looking at swag for the event to not be introduced all at once, but probably starting at the annual Southborough Day event. Things like there will be banners displayed, but additional swag like T-shirts, stickers, bags, merchandise bags, golf shirts, things like that are in work. There are 3 subcommittees being formed: one fundraising, one for the parade itself, which is probably the most fun, and then media, which includes communications. And Jenny Martins is heading up the fundraising. We do have a 501(c)(3) approved, as you probably know. And so that allows us to collect money and spend money, and the merchandise and all that will largely launch at Heritage Day. Sam Stivers did have a suggestion the other night to plan for a Tricentennial monument to be installed. And that is, as he's seen it elsewhere, it's good for fundraising because you can, have people buy a brick or a placard or, some other commemorative part to it. So that's the short story. It's meeting regularly. There's subcommittees formed. Plans are coming together. There's community involvement, and we should be able to increase the pool of volunteers.
Fantastic. It all sounds great. Thank you, Jim.
All right. Any questions on Tricentennial?
Thanks, Jim.
Apologies that I've got to bail out. I've got another group already assembled, but thank you, and I'll see you next time.
All right, thanks,
Okay.
Jim. We will press on. All right, so in that spirit, we have now got review and approve multiple historic house sign program applications. And this is really, friends, another cool story because, again, we got some nice PR help from Beth Malo and My Southborough. She ran that piece, announcing the revamped sign program, the work that we had done on the language, the qualifying language for the program, got the word out, that said, look, we've got, money to spend. We want to spend it. We want to, roll this out with a splash. And very shortly after that piece ran, just by the way, you might have seen on the blog, there was a little bit of confusion about people contacting the commission, and there was the IT, Jay and Hassan in IT were really fantastic. I worked mostly with Hassan, who's just the sweetest guy, to sort of update that language and the picture and stuff. And there was one small little glitch in the redirect on the try to email the historical commission that was going into a dead account. And so they had to rearrange things. And you know, in going through that with them, I think we had originally talked about having like everybody receive those emails, you know, because they would come to the whole commission. And we realized that that was going to be so cumbersome, both from a technical, but from also a practical standpoint, that they ended up setting it up so the stuff just comes to me. And then I just enter it into the, you know, the Google spreadsheet that Annie set up to track that. So that's worked out. But so anyway, the article went up, and I mean, I started getting, you know, quite a bit of, you know, we've got the 2 that we approved last time, and we've got now 12 in the queue. 2 of them I'm going to hold tonight because we need a little bit more. There's some open questions involved where some more background research is going to be needed. And one in particular that it seemed to me was going to cause us to have a much more protracted discussion than frankly we have time for tonight. So I've been in touch with both those applicants just to say, with my apologies, that I'm gonna hold it till our next meeting, when I think we're gonna have a lot more time being clear of all this fiscal year end stuff, the party, the water tower sign, you know, and I knew Mr. Dennington was coming tonight. So, you know, all that stuff is going to be in the rear view, and we'll have more time. So the 2 I'm holding, and the 2 that we're going to hold is 10 Parker Street, which is, if you're looking at another screen, which I am, that one's going to be held. And the 21 Deerfoot Road is going to be held tonight because that also requires more research. So I'm going to work down these in the order that they appear on the spreadsheet, the remaining ones, and try and see if we can do, because, and the other factor with this is that, again, not to unduly influence anybody, the way I want to do this is I'll present the information that we have. You've all had a chance to review it. And then just say, does anybody have questions? Anything you want to hack out? Any reservations, any problems do you see with this application based on your review of the Macros report, the street view, the photographs, you know, the wording? Annie has, you know, done this wonderful job doing up the proofs of all these so we can actually look at how the sign is going to look. Any questions with the wording, the date? If you have an objection, say so, and we'll review it. Otherwise, we'll take a vote and try to move through these with some.
I know you don't want to get into it, and I'm not asking that we do, but would you mind in like a sentence explaining why the 2 that you held are being held? I just that'd be helpful for me,
yeah,
especially as we prepare for the future meeting. Why, like, for something to look at?
Yeah, you know, I don't want to in any way prejudice the conversation. I think I needed more time to look at, and I with the one, I think the Parker Street house to me is one that is going to elicit possibly a fairly extensive discussion, because some of the factors that are at play with that house. It's a very interesting property. It is historic. There's no doubt about it. But I would like to do a little bit more work myself with some of the people at the state historic commission. And in the case of the 21 Deerfoot Road, that's one that just came to me yesterday, and it does really require a little bit more. And that's some of that is coming actually from the owner who wants to look more deeply. And some of these cases, I suggest to the applicant that they look into the Worcester Registry of Deeds when there's some open question. And that the Worcester Registry of Deeds, Annie knows this well, and I've learned it the hard way over the last month or so, is that it's something that can be researched online, but you're a lot better at it if you make a trip to Worcester and have those people sort of give you some tips, because especially researching deeds or mortgage records that exist prior to 1961 is a whole different ball of wax than ones in the last 60 years. And the ones pre-1961 are really, 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 really hard to like work your way through, you know? So some of it involves, let's say with the 21 Deerfoot, for an example, it may necessitate the owner making a trip to Worcester and doing some further digging.
Okay, thank you.
I've done a fair amount of this myself, and we try to help as much as we can, but ultimately we're not Nantucket charging $1,000 for research, you know, like there's only, you know, so far you can go. And in some cases, the applicant needs to do some digging. In some cases, I want to do some more digging.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen again. And again, just, you know, pop in if you want me to stop or you have a question, or I'm going too fast, or whatever the case may be. And this is going to be tough because I got to move and bear with me because I have a lot of open tabs and things I'm trying to juggle here to do this justice. Okay. The first one we have, there's several in a row on Wood Street. I'm happy to say I think the word got out on Wood Street down in Southville, and some neighbors jumped in, and much to my delight. So the first one we're looking at is 4 Wood Street. This is a house. This is the cover sheet of the Macris report on this house. Historically, the N.H. Tyler House at 4 Wood Street, built circa 1840, Greek Revival. And this in the Macris report, you might recall, is believed to be the oldest house on the street. That area of town, of course, as Southville was a cotton and woolen goods manufacturing area, and Wood Street, I believe, was named after William B. Wood, who was a shoe and boot manufacturer in that part of town. And apparently some of the finishing work of shoes was done by people who lived in those houses as sort of piecework. So it's a very interesting story, the middle of the 19th century, that part of town. Here is what the house currently looks like. The photo that you see, I'm running my cursor over it in the Macris report, is taken on the gable end. So it's somewhat misleading and it's a bad photo. But this is the house currently. It has had some certainly updates and alterations. I very strongly suspect that chimney's been rebuilt and, you know, re-sided and stuff, but it looks you know, quite substantially, you know, with the usual modern additions, apparently a deck on the back and whatnot, but it looks quite substantially as it was built in 1840. So to me, this is a fairly straightforward one. That photo was supplied by the applicant. So again, this is 4 Wood Street. Good coverage in the Macris. It also, this one appears in the, as all these Wood Street houses are discussed, usually fairly briefly, in the Southville coverage in the Macris. So any questions about this one? And let me bring up, here is the proof that Annie prepared for the sign. So again, it would be N.H. Tyler House, circa 1840. Pretty straightforward.
No questions here. I think it looks great and is deserving.
Any other discussion on this one? In that case, does someone want to make a motion to approve the N.H. Tyler House? The applicant here is Eamon Partos, again at 4 Wood Street.
I make a motion to approve the N.H. Tyler House on 4 Wood Street.
Second.
Great, thank you. Motion made by Michelle, seconded by Annie. Quick roll call vote. Miller's aye. Annie?
Yes.
Grant?
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes,
Great, thank you. 5-0, approved. Moving on. Second one we have on Wood Street is 7 Wood Street. This is the Mackridge, I'm sorry, I'm messed up already. There we go. 7 Wood Street. This is circa 1850. The E. King House. This is a house described, you see the coverage as Victorian eclectic. And it has a rather interesting, here's a current photo. Beautifully maintained house, really, really attractive. I mean, I love those returns along the roof line, and it's just a lovely, lovely house. Very really nicely landscaped, beautifully painted here. Again, to my view, retains all the integrity of its original design and construction. And here again, here's the coverage. They have it as circa 1850. I didn't see anything that would contradict that. Again, you know, sometimes as this house, as is often the case, I think this is one where actually the Macris and the Patriot Properties listing line up exactly. The Patriot Properties has this house as 1850, and the Macris has it as circa 1850. So I'm very comfortable with the date, very comfortable with the naming based on the information in the Macris report, and certainly very comfortable with this, you know, the way this house meets the street, the integrity, the you know, all the things that we've sort of set out about that home being in good repair. This house is sort of a shining example. So any further discussion on this one? No, somebody want to make a motion on this one to approve?
I move to approve the E. King House at 7 Wood Street.
Second.
Annie, you seconded? Yes? Okay, I'll say Grant made the motion to approve the E. King House at 7 Wood Street. Annie seconded. Roll call vote. Miller's aye. Annie?
Yes.
Grant?
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Dan?
yes,
5-0, 2 down, 7 Wood Street, the E. King House approved. Now, I see where I made my mistake earlier. We did, somebody keep score for me, because this is hard to do. I'm juggling a lot of screens, and we did the NH Tyler House. We just did the E. King House. The one I missed was the J. Flint House at 1. Oh, wait, and I'm sorry, did I neglect to? There's the mock-up. I don't know if I have to roll this back for any reason. Everybody okay with that? It's
Looks
E.
great.
King, yeah, E. King House circa 1850. And the C's are always small, Annie, right? Like that, yeah. So you're like super consistent with these. That looks fantastic. All right, so where I goofed up is I skipped over number 1 Wood Street, which is the J. Flint House. And here is the coverage on this one. These are all neighbors. This is circa 1850, a Greek revival. And I can give you this one's a real beauty. Now that's a Google Maps view. It doesn't do that house justice, but it is quite delightful. Really a pretty house. And I'm sorry I don't have we don't have a better photo. The applicant didn't send one for this house, but it's a lovely house, again, really nicely maintained, intact. And I really don't see any issues with this one. That's what the sign would look like. Again, this is all based on the Macris coverage. J. Flint House, circa 1850. Anything that's jumped out at you on reviewing this material that you want to question, or you have any issues with, or does this look good? Any discussion?
Well,
No.
good to me as well.
Good. This is another really nicely done by Annie. So is there a motion to approve the J. Flint House at 1 Wood Street?
So moved.
Second,
Second by Annie, moved by Grant, second by Annie to approve the J. Flint House at 1 Wood Street. Roll call vote. Miller's aye. Annie,
yes.
Grant?
Aye.
Michelle,
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
5-0 on that one. Another one down. Well done, friends.
Mhm.
We're moving on. Now we get to Fayetteville and the L.A. Newton House at 49 Oak Hill Road. This is a circa 1850 Greek revival. And really quite a lovely house. That's that's a Google Street View shot. And again, if you some of you might have even driven by this house, or I know Annie lives in the same neighborhood, or cruised it on Google Maps.
This
Again-
is exactly across the street from me. I'm looking at it out my window right now.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Was this on the historic house tour?
Yes.
It's a beautiful house.
Well, I haven't had the pleasure of seeing inside this one, but it's just a gorgeous looking house. And again, that's what the sign would look like. L.A. Newton House. And, I didn't want to turn this into like, a tedious history lecture, but you read the Macris reports on these houses, and there's some really great stories. The L.A. Newton House has quite, if I recall the coverage here, it appears in the more extensive coverage of this, I believe it appears in the Fayetteville coverage. And it's really quite interesting. But any discussion on this one? Or are you happy with what the Macris has to say about it, and that, this is a circa 1850 house with the historic name of L.A. Newton? Any discussion? Grant, you turned into the motion man. You want to?
I move that we approve the L.A. Newton House at 49 Oak Hill Road.
Second,
Great. Motion made by Grant, seconded by Annie. Roll call vote. Miller is aye. Annie,
yes.
Grant,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
5-0 on that one. We're getting there. And I would mention, by the way, that I considered a kind of consent agenda approach to this, but it seemed to me that was in fact going to be too cumbersome. It'd be better to go through these one at a time. So off we go.
Kevin, can I just, sorry to interrupt, just
Yeah.
ask a quick clarifying question?
Mhm.
And I believe from our prior conversations, you've already proposed this language, or the naming and the years and everything. You've already proposed that to the homeowner, right? Or no?
In some cases, I've had back and forth on that, which I can explain.
Okay,
And in other cases, the application came in. I said, I reply, thank you, and I'm delighted, and I do a preliminary review just to make sure it meets
yeah,
the broad contours of not the subjective stuff, in terms of age. And then I reply, say, all right, I'm going to enter this in for discussion, but the precise wording, no. And, that's why we've instituted this step of
Okay,
we will go back to everybody we approved tonight. I'll get in touch and say, this is what we approved.
got it.
Here's the proof.
Okay,
And please confirm in writing that,
got it. Okay, so their formal approval is subsequent to ours. It's the
No.
next step in this process. Very good.
right,
Okay.
right. Exactly. And when we get to the last one, I'll explain, for instance, the one Chestnut Hill Roadhouse that I did have an exchange because the applicant had very strong opinion, an interesting opinion,
Okay.
that and we had a conversation about it, and it netted what I'm proposing
Okay.
here, and I'll explain. It differs slightly from the macros. So next is 8 Main Street, and where is the oh, I know, the issue with 8 Main Street is the best coverage on this house actually appears in the Southborough Center Historic District narrative. That's the new district, that it's an 84-page document. And without getting too far into the weeds on this, what I will explain to you about 8 Main Street, let me show you the house. This is it. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful house. Blending sort of per the Macros Greek Revival and Italianate elements. This is the front. This is looking at it from on Main Street. To your right, as you face this photo, is Lattisquama. So it's on the corner of Main and Lattisquama, and you get a very good view of the side of this very lovely house on Lattisquama. And then you face it from the front. So that's what the house looks like currently. In the coverage of this house, it's a long, there's an individual report on the house, and then I thought the better and more interesting narrative coverage was actually in the more recent National Register report that was approved at the end of 2021. And this is one where there's a bit of an open question on the naming. You see here in the National Register report, they have it as the Marsh Barney or Barney House. Circa 1856, there always is agreement on that, agreement on the style of the house. But the note that the builder of this house was Henry M. Marsh. And the story involved in this is that Marsh bought the land, built the house, but it was more historically associated with the Barney family that occupied it for quite a long time after that. And so it's listed here as the Marsh Barney house. In the individual coverage, it's listed as the Henry M. Marsh house. And so you get into this thing of, and actually this comes up in the one Chestnut Hill Road one. The Macros reports differ ever so slightly. And again, and this one has Marsh Barney house and notes Henry M. Marsh builder. And oh, sorry, I'm back on Oak Hill Road. Let me see if I have, no. So Andy prepared 2 different ways. Marsh Barney house or the Henry M. Marsh house. And again, this is the builder. I have somewhat of an agnostic view on ultimately what is. I think the conflicts in the Macros report suggest to me that they could live with either, and so could I. But Michelle, what do you have to say about that?
So Kevin, if you look at our house, it's the same. So it has the hyphenated name, and then it has the builder. So go back to the district.
Oh, okay. Let me bring that back up. Yeah. right? You're
So
at 10
they-
Main. So you are the Flag Buck House.
Yes. So
And
Russell Flag is the builder.
I'm so glad you brought this up. And so, and your sign is
Flag Buck
Buck.
House. Yes.
Yeah. Well, that may really argue for consistent. Michelle is basically across the street from these folks. That really may argue for Marsh Barnay House. Is that what anybody have a different feeling about this? And let me sorry, I don't want to make this complicated, but let's bring up that's the hyphenate version. That, I mean, that works for me. There's good coverage on this, and the Marshes were like a family of carpenters, and it's again a very interesting story in the Macris coverage. But again, the house ended up historically associated with Barnay family. So with that, any discussion on this? Would this work for you, the Marsh Barnay?
I like the consistency, as Michelle noted. If hers is hyphenated with that same configuration to include the builder, my vote would be this this sign rather than Henry M. Marsh.
Yeah, I'm swayed too by the fact that, you know, precedent and, you know, the Hokinson's house across the street is the same format. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
swayed me as well.
We had nothing to do with it. That was what the historic commission.
Yeah. Well, I I really think there's an argument for the kind of
Yep.
consistency with the report. And again, it was named as Henry M. Marsh House. And when I read the coverage, frankly, my initial thought was, oh, it's the Henry M. Marsh House. What is this Marsh Barnay nonsense? But I've been brought around actually by thinking about this further, and especially by hearing what you had to say. Grant or Dan, do you have anything you want to add on this? Are you happy with Marsh Barnay?
I'm happy with this. To be honest, when I had read the Macris report, I thought it had appeared as Marsh Barnay, and to be honest, I don't think I had seen the register report. So, but I'm glad to see that it matches. So I would be fine with this.
Good. Dan, are you okay with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. Having gone through the report, I think both names being on the house sign makes a lot of sense.
Fantastic. Grant, motion man.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the sign for the Marsh Barnay House at 8 Main Street.
Perfect.
Second.
Great. Motion by Grant, second by Annie, approving the Marsh Barnay House at 8 Main Street. Roll call vote, Miller's aye. Annie,
Yes.
Grant,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
Dan,
Yes.
5-0 again. Thank you so much. Moving on. 15 Lyman Street. And let's see, this is in the East Southborough Center coverage. 15 Lyman Street. What a beauty that is. That is a Queen Anne gable front home. It's listed in the Macris as built 1901, 1902. And what we've tried to do, I think, to be consistent here is to go with the actual completed date. So in that case, now I noted it's in the date on the sign. I think, Annie, you might have it as 1901. I don't know if we need, you know, just a quick chat about this, but let me pull up your proof. Yeah, Charles Newton House, Charles Newton II. And by the way, I did look into the matter of when there's a second, you know, or third or Henry VIII kind of thing. I thought I knew this, but I want to be sure. If there's like a junior or a senior, you get the comma. If it's the second, third, eighth, no comma. So this is correct. The Charles Newton II house. The only change that I would make on this one, my suggestion, just one vote of 5 here, but that it would be 1902. unless there was.
Just to kind of explain, I just went based on what was on, what the year construction based on the Macros database. It seems like that's the year we generally go with. But I do see that it further says 0102. So I will say in general real estate, again, in real estate, it's completely separate. So I'll preface it by saying that. But generally, the year constructed is actually not even when construction started. It's when the permits were pulled. So in general, I think that it's usually when it was started. But doesn't really matter to me either way.
Yeah, that would be one we'd want to be, because we're going to have this come up again. I would always lean toward the date the house was actually finished, because if you put you start a foundation in 1901, is it really built if you complete the house in 1902? Like, we definitely want to avoid the hyphen. I mean, I don't think we're committing any crime one way or another. If it's 1901 or 1902, you think it should be 01. Is that what you're saying, right?
I mean, we're kind of splitting hairs when, others are circa, and it could be, it could be a swing of 5 to 10 years. So.
I mean, we could all, I mean, to speak to it, we could also just go circa 1900. I myself would go with 1901, which is when construction began.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's just from my perspective, working as, as a historian, but, to Annie's point, circa covers essentially 10 years either
Right.
way.
Yeah, I since we know, I think when the Macros is specific, they know it was built during this period. That I'd like to go with the exact date. It's just a matter of picking A or B, I think. So I think that's 2 votes for 1901, right? Grant or Michelle, do you have any thoughts, opinions on this?
Yeah, I leaning towards oh, go ahead.
No, I have no real, I think the circa. That.
Which way are you leaning, Grant?
Oh, I think I'm leaning towards 1901. One thing I wanted to mention, I was just taking another look at the Macros report. And this is for the East Southborough Center, which is where I think it's mentioned.
Yes.
There's another house called the Charles, and we ran into this with the parsonage. There's another house, I believe it's the house next door, that's also called the Charles Newton
Oh, that's
second house.
interesting.
Yes.
And then also Charles Newton II built another house. I don't know what it's called. I think it's at 10 Lyman. So there's 3 houses within 5 houses of each other, likely, that all might have the same name, or at least 2 of them definitely have the same name. So I just wanted to be careful for approving that, that we all know about that.
Good catch.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And I think all the more reason to be specific about the date, because we have the specific date, and the predicted Charles Newton.
Well, is there harm in saying 1901-02? Exactly. I mean, either exactly how we see it on that sheet, or just -02 at the end of this. I feel like that might more accurately tell the story of the house.
My own opinion is that I would rather approve what's in front of us there, the 1901, because I can live with that. Seems like at least 3 of you prefer the 01, and I could live with that just fine, and just go that way. I would rather have that than the -02 or 1901 to 1902. Because that does feel like the kind of official hair splitting that might not be productive.
Kevin, or anyone else actually, do you have thoughts on, I don't know what the proposed solution to what I had mentioned was, or if there is one, but about two houses having the exact same name right next to each other. I know that we thought it was an issue at a previous one that had an alternate name. I'm not saying that we should do that here, but should we, I don't know actually if the other house has a sign. If there'll be two Charles Newton houses right next to each other, or if we think that's an issue or not.
Personally, I don't think it is an issue. If that's what, you know, the research and the architectural historian, you know, has told us. I don't particularly have a problem with it, especially they're not the exact same date. So you've got, and by the way, this is, yeah, 15 Lyman, Charles Newton, the second house, 17 Lyman, Charles Newton, the second house, with a different build date. I mean, to me, to some degree, it is what it is. You know, there's the Charles Newton, the second house that was built in 1899, and there's a Charles Newton, the second house that was built in 1901. And in the absence of, you know, a more compelling reason to go with a different name, you know what I mean? I don't have an issue with it. But does anyone else have a question about this? What I'm saying is that that's what I would approve, based on what I've heard the sentiment being right there. Charles Newton, the second house, 1901.
Right. And I think the only way that we would then be able to differentiate the houses would be similar to what we just did with, and what Michelle pointed to earlier, which is you have the builder, but then you also have the importance of the family that was there.
Right, right.
And so that's, the hyphen wouldn't be in 1901, 1902. The only area where there would be a hyphen would be the Charles Newton, the second house. Like, that's where we would then be differentiating between the builder and the homeowners of historical importance.
Yeah, and I think that's a bridge that I would like, I think we can cross when we come to it.
Yeah.
But I don't see a compelling, you know, just to make up a hyphenate for this one, because there's another house that, yeah.
That's, yeah, I'm not advocating for anything. I think it's an interesting issue that we've now come across multiple times. And I think we'll probably continue to come across it. So,
Well, we are on the very next one. There's going to be an interesting, brief little conversation on this. So is there a motion to approve the Charles Newton, the second house, 1901 at 15 Lyman Street, this lovely Queen Anne gable front residence?
So moved.
Second,
That was Dan. Yes, moved by Dan, seconded by Annie. Roll call vote. Miller's aye. Annie?
yes.
Grant?
yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
5-0. Charles Newton, the second house, approved. We are getting there. This is great. Next, we have 6 Ward Road, and 6 Ward Road is in the Brigham Pond area, which is a sort of at the extreme western edge of town, like off of Route 30. You're almost to Westboro. In fact, part of the complicated matter of running this particular property down. Let me bring up the photo of 6 Ward Road, which is this delightful little bungalow, as you see here. This is the street view. This is one that circa 1920 in the Macris, and no, we've got, I'm sorry. Yeah. And the Patriot Properties has this as 1915, which is unusual because often when there's a discrepancy between Macris and Patriot Properties, the Patriot Property date is later, often representing the first sale or transaction of the house. In this case, again, Patriot has it as 1915. Macris has it as circa 1920. Now, this is one where I had a back and forth with the homeowner a little bit. Very, very, very nice guy, Andre Fortin. And he and his wife have owned this home for a long time. I believe, I don't have it right at hand, but I believe it's about 60 years. And he bought it from, and I will say, when you go into the Brigham Pond area, Macris here, and let me try to bring this up. Because it's a tricky one. Described as, this well-preserved, small shingled house. And there's no name, no historic name. Now, that's not unusual. There's simply a circa 1920 date. It's in the Macris. It's unquestionably, obviously more than 75 years old. This house is 104 years old. Just a lovely example of its type. And I think, wonderfully maintained. I'm trying to bring it up again, sorry. Why am I not seeing it? It's gotta be, I gotta have it here somewhere. Sorry. Can't get the well, I hope you remember what the house looks like. It's absolutely charming. And the Fortins have owned it, I believe, for over 60 years. I believe they bought the house. I could be mistaken. It's either 44 or 64 years. They've been in it a very long time. They purchased it. I'm sorry, I'm trying to bring this up. If you just bear with me 1 second. I want to bring up the conversation I had with Mr. Fortin about this house. Okay. Again, sorry for the dead air. Okay, so they bought the house in August of 1984. So they've had it for 40 years. They bought it from Harvey and Betty Bigelow. Harvey Bigelow has passed away. Betty is still alive. Harvey is buried. I've done a lot of research on this house, trying to help this particular one out. Harvey is buried in the rural cemetery with his parents. Francis D. Bigelow, and let me see if I can call up, and his wife, May. Francis D. Bigelow and wife May are both buried in the rural cemetery. Their son is beside them, Harvey D. Bigelow, buried in the same plot and on the same family headstone as his parents. He died in 2012. Initially, Mr. Fortin thought that perhaps Harvey Bigelow had actually built the house that he bought from him in 1984. But based on dates, and I did a lot of, and ably assisted by Marcy, my wife in this, who's got as many hours, if not more, than I have into this project, trying to get this straightened out. Harvey was not old enough to have built this house based on Patriot and Macris information. We believe that it was Francis D. Bigelow. Francis D. Bigelow, and now the name is flying right out of me. His father was a much larger landowner. The crux of the problem over in that area, but this is all agricultural land. The Bigelow family owned a pretty large spread over there. And actually, if I can, let me try to bring this up because, no, that's not it. Sorry, I think this is okay, yeah, this is the Brigham Pond area. Let me get the, Daniel Bigelow had a very large, much larger house in the neighborhood. And that basically what Marcy and I spent a lot of time actually on the Worcester Registry of Deeds site digging in this pre-1961 stuff. It just took hours and hours. And what you find out is that all this land, there were large parcels, and some of them, it's even complicated by the fact that the parcels spread into Westboro. So Westboro officials were involved, and sometimes a Bigelow is listed as resident in Westboro, but it's really the one that owns the land in Southboro and so on. And we look back to the Daniel Bigelow and then another prior Bigelow and what they held. And there was a lot of farmland that was slowly divided off, basically cut up into smaller and smaller parcels. And the Macris describes 6th Ward Road as one of several houses. And the other issue is that the roads didn't even exist when this land was originally purchased. And, you know, the records don't show the original road, and the roads are added later. And then some of these houses are what they call infill housing, basically filled in between some of the larger parcels as they're subdivided. So the bottom line is, again, I don't feel like I'm telling this story very well, but there was a lot of splitting of parcels and family transfers, and not long before I don't want to misstep this. Harvey Bigelow sold 6th Ward Road to the Fortons, who currently own it. It was actually a piece off the larger holding of Francis Bigelow. At the end of this whole long story, here's where I'm at. I am as confident as I could be at this point that that's who built the house. Francis D. Bigelow. He's the right age, he's the right place, he's the right time. However, based on what the research that Marcy and I did, we think that it's possible that the house was built later than either the Macris or the Patriot Properties has it. And this is basically, we looked at census data and all kinds of stuff. Bottom line is, I wouldn't bet my own house or anybody else's house on this, but I'm pretty confident. And I did have a back and forth with Andre on this, and he agreed that the Francis D. Bigelow house, based on everything I told him, seems right to him. He does have, he tried to reach out to the widow, the Betty Bigelow, that sold them the house in 1984, I guess it was, but hasn't been able to reach her yet. So we got a couple options. You could approve a sign that simply said, circa 1915, which covers the date, and have no name on it. And again, there are, you know, plenty of houses like this in Southborough that don't have a name. I think, though, it would be advantageous to try to pin it down to what the associations are. I mean, there's another option just to say Bigelow House. The problem with that, friends, is that there's so many Bigelows in Southborough and a lot of Bigelow houses. So I really think you need a given name to tie it in. And again, as I probably, you know, Marcy and I together probably have about 15 hours invested in trying to track this one down on behalf of the Fortons. And this is my best guess at this point. But so we could approve this as it is. We could approve it with just a date and no name. The other option is, and I would have to, Signorama gives us some latitude in terms of ordering and then making changes. They'll allow us one change. And because we need to, you know, we're at a fiscal year deadline to try to approve as many of these as possible, we could approve. And then I think pay for, but hold back final production for maybe a month and see if we can get better information. Because again, I just went to the end of the line trying to get this one resolved. And like I said, this is my best guess, but I can't guarantee it. So do you guys, I'm sorry for that long-winded, and it wasn't a very cogent explanation, but basically I've tried like hell on this one, and that's the best I can come up with right now tonight. So, you know, arguably this is one I could have held, but it's a little bit different in character from some of these other ones, is that we know about as much as we can know, and we're so close. If Mr. Fortin is able to get a reply from Betty Bigelow, and she says, yeah, my father-in-law built the house, that would be the last nail for me. And then I'd say, yeah, this is definitely the Francis D. Bigelow house. So it just depends on how fussy you guys want to be about it.
Yeah, Kevin, well, first of all, I appreciate all the work that you've done, put in trying to nail this down. For me, it just sounds like there's a bit too much uncertainty right now for me to be comfortable moving forward with it. That's not to say that I would, you know, never approve this sign if it was to come back. But I think just because it sounds like there's some uncertainty about the year and the owner, and that we might be able to get more information on it. I personally, I know that we have the ARPA deadline as well as the budget deadline, but I would probably be more comfortable in waiting, making sure that we get it right. And even if that means $75 out of next year's budget, I think that would be what I would prefer to do. But that's just my, I know that's probably disappointing, but that's just where I am on it based on what I've heard.
Well, one thing I would say, Grant, is that the discrepancy on the age to me is not a stopper, because we find this all the time. Macra says circa 1920. Again, Patriot Properties had it as 1915, which would be covered by circa 1920. So I wouldn't have any qualms about that. I also don't have any qualms about the various criteria that we have, that it's clearly a historic house, a very nice example of the vernacular, you know, bungalow style, 104 years old. And even if that date is off by 10 years, it's still well within the range. You know, it only has to be 75 years or older, well maintained, and tells, I mean, I must say, I hadn't thought much about the Brigham Pond area, but I'm now fascinated by it. Like, it really is a very historic area, and it tells a good story. It's very convoluted by the fact that the property lines and record keeping, and you had agricultural land, like so much of Southborough, that was sort of divvied up in a way that among family members, and then outsiders, and that it's, and there's a reason, by the way, that the name is blank in the Macris report, because I guarantee you that Forbes and Schuler that did, the 2000 survey ran into the same roadblocks that I've been running into over the last week, trying to, like nail this down. But for instance, I would be prepared to vote to approve a sign for this property, because the property itself clearly qualifies, but then pending language, because to me, the only question is really, should or should it not have a name on it? Does that make sense? I hear you.
I guess
as
I
well.
just don't understand why we would need to take a vote. I mean, the application will still be there. I'm
Right.
not in any particular rush, I don't think, and I don't understand why we.
Now,
need
other
to
than
rush in
to
order to
commit
do it.
other than to commit the money, so that we've got more,
I understand that, but what I'm saying is that I'd prefer. Also, this is the first time, I mean, I didn't receive any of this kind of ahead of time, so
Yep.
all I have is kind of what you've told us, and I'm not saying it's wrong, obviously.
Oh.
But I'm just saying, I'm right now not comfortable voting on it based on the information that we have and the level of uncertainty. And again, personally, I don't view the end of the year deadline as a deal breaker. I think we could take it up next meeting or something. And, as you said, we rarely spend our entire historic budget. I don't, and we might be expecting donations to offset some of these costs. So I'd rather get it right, similar with all the signs that we've done recently. And sometimes that might take a little more time, but that's just my opinion.
I support that for Grant. Kevin, I definitely see your point and, committing the funds and, figuring out the language later. On the production end, that does make it a little bit more complicated. And it's possible that they wouldn't produce any of the signs until they have all of the signs ready to go. So I think logistically, I think it's cleaner if we kind of separate it from the other batch that presumably is, ready to go much quicker. And, I feel like if Grant's saying, he needs more time, I want to support him to, be able to look over the information and get the additional information from the homeowner and potentially previous owner to do this right.
The other thing that I can do is, a part of this was to meet the finance office, and I mostly dealt directly with Carla McAuliffe, and to meet their deadline to commit the ARPA funds fully by June 30th. But I'd be happy to go talk to Carla and say, look, we've actually got a couple. And as I'm doing some rough math here, if we don't approve this one, for instance, we're going to underspend the total with the water tower sign and this house signs, and the total ARPA allocation we were given. We'll underspend that amount, which was that I don't have right in front of me, was something to the tune of
like
$20. Yeah, we'll underspend it by about $50. So I'd happy to go to Carl and say, listen, I know we're going to approve several more of these within the next month or two, but right now we're $50 underspend, and maybe they can hold the $50 for us. So yeah, it's fine if you guys want to hold this one. It's a tricky one, and I tell you, Marcy and I gave it a hell of a shot, but I can't guarantee I'm right. So is that a consensus, Michelle? Dan, you want to hold this one? Okay, I see nods. I don't think we need to vote it. Let's just hold it. And I will be in touch with Mr. Fortin, and I'm rooting for them to get this. He's a really good guy, and I think very passionate about his house. And obviously, you take a look at the house; they takes a lot of pride in it. So I think we'll get there. Moving on, then, we have got Fayetteville Village Hall. And I will tell you that this is one that I reached out to the Historical Society folks, specifically to Michael Wyson, and made the offer. And the reason I did it was, number one, because we are on record supporting this project. We wrote, as you recall, a letter in support of a Mass Cultural Council grant, which they received, and indicating, the importance of the Southborough Historical Society and the work they do, and their cultural importance to the town. And secondly, under the master plan, we are charged with working in close collaboration whenever possible with the society folks. And C, because I don't know if you've been by the Fayetteville Village Hall lately, but it's looking pretty sensational these days. And they're damn near done. And let me tell you, when it opens, it's going to be spectacular. They've done what I regard as a brilliant job on the restoration of the facade, the exterior of the building. And they've I know, made extra effort to preserve, for instance, a very beautiful sort of historic floors, the staircase that leads you up to the second floor, which is now absolutely spectacular. I've seen that project at several points along the way. When it had a big flood in the basement, of water was running through the basement of that building like a river, to where I haven't been in the last couple months, but I've seen photos that Michael has been nice enough to send along. And let me tell you, it's going to be something else. And so it seemed to me, as they near a conclusion of this project and move the museum over there and open up this event and cultural space and giving classes and whatnot, that we ought to be showing our support. So that was the impulse. And when I offered it, Michael and his board replied, I will say with alacrity, that they were thrilled to be asked, and that yes, they would like one, please and thank you very much. So of course, as you know, there's very extensive coverage on this Colonial Revival meeting hall. It's been auditorium, community center, warehouse, vaccination point during the 1918 pandemic. It's had a lot of lives, and now it's going to have a new one. Built in 1911. Again, I think really very nicely restored. So I thought this was an easy one, at least it was for me. That's what the sign would look like. Pretty straightforward, no naming issues with this one, because we know what it is. And any discussion on this one?
And I support it. The only question I have, I believe that the Macros report said that it was sometimes referred to as Fayetteville Hall and other times referred to as Fayetteville Village Hall. Is this one the more historic name?
Yes, and that was the one that Michael Wyson preferred. He was quite like, yes, Fayetteville Village Hall, that's what it is. I'm like, okay. And since that does comport with the Macros, I was like, fine, you got it.
Okay. Thanks.
Anybody want to make a motion on this one?
So moved.
Thank you, Dan. I think that was Dan. I was looking down. Second, Annie, second. So motion made by Dan, seconded by Annie. Roll call vote. Miller's aye. Annie.
Yes.
Grant.
Yes.
Michelle.
Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
5-0 for our friends at the Historical Society. I'm sure they'll be very appreciative. Next is, and we're almost done. 2 more to go. And it'll be a real achievement, I think. The next one is the Nathan and Sally Bannister House. This is also one that I, on my initiative, reached out to the good folks, Joe Cruciani at the Knights of Columbus. It's their building. That's a shot of it with our brand new National Register sign in front of it. And it's worth reminding you folks that the Knights of Columbus, our sign is on their property because of the configuration of the sidewalk there, which is quite wide. And DPW didn't want to chop into that brand new sidewalk. They wanted it set back, and for snow removal reasons and all kinds of complicated things, trucks passing. There was a whole, trust me, there was an extensive discussion about this sign. That's where they wanted it. That's the beginning of the district, right over the tracks. And so what was that? Sometime last fall, I went to a meeting of the Knights of Columbus. A real nice bunch of guys welcomed me in, were very kind and very enthusiastic about having that sign on their property, on their front lawn. And so, you know, in the course of talking to them and thinking about this, I said to them, do realize, right, fellas, that your charming little, it's this little sort of bandbox, again, you know, the Macris has this nasty habit of calling things sometimes no style, which they do with this one. Other reports put it as a cape, and really it's early vernacular architecture of the kind that you would have seen revolutionary, early national periods. And the Macris coverage on this house indicates that it is probably the earliest extant building in the center of town. That one right there. It's a simple, fairly utilitarian on some level structure, but quite interesting and quite fascinating. And I said to the KFC guys when I met with them in the fall, I said, you realize this building dates to circa 1805. You know, your hall is 219 years old. And they were like, oh, you know, that, I don't know if they thought about it that much, or I'm sure they knew it, but it just, you know, my enthusiasm, I think, was somewhat contagious to them. Anyway, they happily accepted our sign. So I thought to myself, here we are trying to gear up this program. I walk by this building all the time and I say, God, that's an adorable little something there, 1805. It should have a historic house sign. And so and in part as a thank you to them for their generosity in taking our historic district sign, I reached out and offered to Joe and his membership, and he took it to a vote, and they were enthusiastic yeses. So they would like the sign. The coverage, which I sent, gives a nice accounting of this building. There's also a very good accounting. Actually, the better accounting of this is in the narrative of the Southborough Center Historic District document. There's really good description of this building's rather complex history, which I won't get into. That's the story on that one. There is Annie's mock-up, which I think looks rather nice. And I've already, I think I said to Joe at the Knights of Columbus that it would look really smashing just to the left of their front door, which is, you know, kind of where we recommend. So any discussion on this one?
No.
Oh, I consider this some good citizenship and good history at the same time. And again, a nice way to thank these folks for doing what they didn't have to do and welcoming me into their meeting house. Is there a motion to approve this one?
I move to approve the Nathan and Sally Bannister House at 1 Main Street.
I second it.
Great. Motion made by Grant, seconded by Michelle to approve the Nathan and Sally Bannister House, circa 1805, 1 Main Street. Roll call vote. Miller is aye. Annie?
Yes.
Grant?
Aye.
Michelle?
Yes,
Dan?
Yes.
5-0. Congratulations, Knights of Columbus friends. That's 9 down on decision, 8 approved, 1 held, and 1 to go. Here's the last one. And this is a really interesting one. This is what I've got up now, right, is the coverage on Chestnut Hill Farm, which is the better coverage of the 2 Macris reports on 1 Chestnut Hill Road. This is built, and the Macris report, you might have noticed this if you were reading it, that part of the attribution is the fact that it's scratched or written into the chimney, 1856, 1857. And that's what the Macris report has this building being constructed. And I had actually suggested to the applicant, this is Frank Tipton is the applicant, that we would be better going with the 1857 completion date, but based on the decision we took with regard to that 15 Lyman Street property to go with the, remember that was the 1901, 1902, and you guys wanted 1901. I would have Annie amend this sign slightly just to put it back to 1856. If that, because then we're consistent, you know. Now here's the story behind this one, and it's interesting, and I'm going to try to pull this the correspondence I had with Mr. Tipton up on his house, because it'll help you understand where we're going here. The coverage on this house in the Macris, let me see if I can bring this up. This is, yeah, 1 Chestnut Hill Road. This is where the coverage, this is in the Chestnut Hill Farm coverage, and it talks about it likely being built by John Liscombe, Lyscom, who sold it with 21 acres to Josiah Fay in 1772. Now, when you get to the inventory portion of the let's see if I can pull this up. I'm sorry, it's a little bit wonky here. Here we go. They list it as the Major Josiah Fay house. And the reason it's associated with Major Josiah Fay, some of you may already know, is I think pretty much without question, the most famous Revolutionary War veteran that Southborough produced, not least because of the manner and timing of his death, which was by poison in New York City in 1776, poisoned apparently by vacatories. And so even though the house was constructed by Liscombe, and I think the other report, the other Macris report that just deals with the house itself, calls it the Liscombe Fay house, and it uses the first name, which is escaping me at the moment, of Liscombe. So when Mr. Tipton, the current owner, contacted me, he says it's believed constructed around 1756, and would like to request a sign, and he says at the end of his message that catch this, he says Mary Fay, Josiah Fay's wife, lived in the house much longer than Josiah did. And he notes that Josiah died during the Revolutionary War. So we'd like to call, we'd like it to be called the Fay House on the sign, not the Josiah Fay House. And I replied, and his suggestion was, yeah, that's what, so, but I replied to him and I sent the 2 reports and I said, well, the the Chestnut Hill Farm report lists the house as the Major Josiah Fay house, right? The individual report on the house lists it as the John Liscombe hyphen, like the other one we just approved, Major Josiah Fay house, reflecting, as covered in that former report, that Liscombe was the likely builder, right? And I said to him, I understand your point about Mary Bent Fay's long occupancy, because I looked into this, and Mary Bent was her maiden name. Mary Bent Fay lived in the house after her husband's murder in New York in 1776 till 1833. In other words, she lived in the house another 57 years. So, you know, I said to him, I said, I understand your point about Mary Bent Fay's long occupancy, though I think we would want to just avoid calling it just the Fay house, both because there are quite a number of homes in Southborough named for various Fays, and because of Major Josiah Fay's historical importance. So I said, besides the two Macris listed alternatives, again, one was the Major Josiah Fay house or the John Liscombe Major Josiah Fay house. I said, based on what his feelings were, I said, I think a reasonable compromise would be the Major Josiah and Mary Fay house. And I think, you know, there is something to be said for a little bit of gender equity here. It was very important in my own historic house sign that we get the whole thing on there. And if you recall, mine is the Ferris H. and Mary Haviland house. And I feel quite satisfied with that. And I said to him, you know, given the fact that one of the Macris reports listed as simply the Major Josiah Fay house, and that Major Josiah Fay didn't live there a hell of a long time before his poisoning in New York, but his wife did for 57 years, that it seemed to me quite reasonable and, dare I say, a little bit more progressive in thinking than maybe the Macris reports are, to say that this is the Major Josiah and Mary Fay house. And so that's what I asked Annie to proof up, and that's what you have here. It notes the name of the major historical figure who lived in the house, and it also honors his wife, who soldiered on as a widow for 57 years in the same domicile, which I think is pretty important. So sorry, you know, that, again, that's a long story, but I wanted to give you some, the only thing that I would change from this proof, Annie, based on what we decided earlier tonight, is I would roll that back 1 year and say 1756, because we know the house was constructed in the 56-57 year, and the Macris report is quite definitive about that. So to me, to call it the Major Josiah Fay and Mary Fay house is a nice balance, again, of maybe a little bit less sexist thinking, perhaps, than you sometimes see in some of the reports, but also, again, gets the name of the major historical figure on the house, and then we'll get the date right. Any thoughts you guys have on this one? Does that make sense or sound good, or?
No additional thoughts, just thank you for your, you know, thorough, you know, research and investigation into this to get it right. I think that all sounds good on my end.
Yes, I agree. I think it's a nice compromise. I'm assuming that the homeowner is okay with that.
Oh, yeah, I should have said, Grant, enthusiastic.
Okay, great.
Sounds good to me! Exclamation point was his reply to that.
I could also say sounds good to me. So there we go.
Thank you. Dan and Michelle, you okay with this one?
Yes, very much so.
Thank you. Okay, Michelle, yeah?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, thank you. All right, well, good. Somebody, motion man, give it to us one more time.
I make a motion that the house at, could somebody give me the address? Is it 1 Chestnut Hill?
One Chestnut.
Yes.
Road.
1 Chestnut Hill. I make the motion that the Major Josiah and Mary Fay house at 1 Chestnut Hill be approved with the year 1756.
56.
Second.
Great. So moved by Grant, seconded by Andy. This is going to be the Major Josiah and Mary Fay House, 1756. So proof to be amended. Roll call vote. Miller's aye. Andy,
Yes.
Grant,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
5-0, we did it. I thank you so much. We approved 9 of 10 there, held one. I think your wisdom prevailed on the hold. I will talk to Carla about this. I think we are in good shape. This leads us to some talk about budget, and I'm going to try to be brief. ARPA gave us $1,730. We had previously paid for 5 signs at $368.65, leaving $1,361.35. The water tower, I spec'd in at the more expensive price, but we've gone for the, what was it, 508? So there'll be about a $14 discrepancy there. Once I back out the 10 signs we've just approved, again, we're going to have about underspend on that ARPA allocation. Accomplished, I think, a really impressive amount to reboot this sign program and to get this many signs properly vetted and approved this quick is, to me, nothing short of miraculous. And I really am happy and grateful. We'll have about $50 left out of the $1,730. So I think that was a pretty good spend. And I think I may be able to convince Carla to hold off that money because we know we got a couple other pending signs in the pipeline. It's just a matter of, particularly that Fortin one, I really want to get straight. I guess I have a lot invested in it. Then when we turn to our regular budget, at this point, we'd only spent we still have 926 out of the original 1,000 because we paid for 1 sign out of there. So again, I was authorized to spend up to 400 for this party. Again, I'm going to spend a lot less. So, you know, we're going to be kicking back $600 or $700 to the town out of our budget, which in a way breaks my heart. But I think we did a really good job getting this money spent. I'm so pleased with the approval of the water tower sign, which I think is going to be a really nice. This is what historical commissions are supposed to do, you know, is remind people of what things mean and why they're valuable. So that's great. And we've come out of the gate fantastically on the house sign. So I'd have to sit here and, because we adjusted some numbers here, not approving 1 sign and taking the lower bid on the water tower thing. So I can't give you the precise thing to the penny, but you have a pretty good sense of where we're at. And it's, I think, you know, good shape. And by the way, we've gotten 1 donation has come in on the house sign program. Mine, I told Annie today when we spoke that I went down to the townhouse last week with the check in my pocket and I forgot to give it to somebody. We'll have 2 when I go down to the townhouse Friday, probably. And then I think what I would propose is that when we present these signs, I think there's a very nice way just to kindly remind people that we are amenable and that the point of this is to make the house sign program sustainable on its own so we can engage in another. And we've got some coming that really are going to cost money. In fact, are going to cost way more money than we have. And we're going to have to figure out how to get some. So if we can, in a kind way, say, you know, if you would like to support the program and donate, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the donation that we got actually was so far was the sign we held for the Fortins, but we're going to get that one straightened out and take care of them in short order. So The other thing I tell you in chair's report is that I did talk to town council last week during office hours. And I had a twofold purpose of wanting to speak with him. And it ended up a fairly long conversation. I felt bad. I felt like I was monopolizing his time. But the first topic of conversation was on the question of the partial demolitions. You know, we had that one at 77 Deerfoot, and we made a decision, you know, that we had to consider, even though there was some ambiguity about the date on that sunroom they wanted to tear off, and it didn't affect the original 1840 house. But that we, you know, felt that we were obliged under the bylaw to deal with it as if it affected the entire property. And Mr. Tallerman, town council, agreed with me, basically, or agreed with us, that we were doing it the right way, and this was the right course of action. And the reason I had inquired of him on this point and felt some urgency on it is because I was contacted by an architect working in the early stages. I believe they're in front of the ZBA right now on a similar kind of project that is going to involve the partial demolition of a structure that was added. This one, it seems to have been added well into the 20th century, but is connected to a house, again, that dates to the mid-19th century. And so, you know, without making busy work for people or obstructing homeowners or any of that, you know, to make the process as smooth as possible for people, but also to make sure that we, if there's a precedent that's going to be established, that it's a good one and a sustainable one and not a negative one. You know, I wanted his input on this. And again, he said that, no, you're doing this the right way, and you should. We talked a little bit about the question of, you remember it was, what's the meaning of the word substantial? And his recommendation was not to get into parsing that. You know, we've got some flexibility on really obvious cases, but his advice was basically to stay the course. So that was reassuring. And I did mention that you know, it remains our intention to bring the DDBL back for an update. And he, you know, I said that my main concern with the DDBL was the fact that it was frozen in time, that it's only properties built 1925 or earlier fall under it, and that meanwhile, every year that goes by, there's a larger group of properties that aren't subject to it, and that I wanted a 75-year. Any property 75 years or older that would comport with the existing zoning, the existing definitions in the zoning code. And he agreed with that and mentioned to me that most towns operate, in fact, in that fashion. So I said that that was my major goal, and just made him aware that we would probably be asking for his advice going forward as we actually start to work on that. The second question I had for him was with regard to, it goes back to the conversation we had with John Deli Priscoli regarding 84 Main Street and the hedge issue and the trees and the plantings and the ongoing nature of the preservation restriction as a document that required regular review. Again, council concurred that the regular review was warranted and required and necessary, and advised us. And I think this comports with what Mr. Deli Priscoli is looking for, frankly, is some clarity, so that he doesn't have something hanging over him. He advised us to meet as a group and talk about it, and to start documenting our opinions and decisions to Mr. Deli Priscoli. And so I'm going to take him at his advice, because, you know, we're obligated to try to do the best we can under the legal document that we're charged with administering. So that'll be something to, and you know, hopefully that can be done in a very cordial, collegial, productive way. That's certainly my goal. So now we are to members' reports, and Grant. I don't know if there's any more about the CPC. I did watch your meeting last night.
Yeah, not much of a update, I would say. Biggest thing is a membership change. We lost one of our members, was not reappointed recently, our vice chair. So we, at our last meeting, we appointed a new vice chair, Lisa Braccio, took over, or will be taking over July 1st, in that role. We are going to be taking a break, not a break, but essentially, so the application process is technically opening in a couple days, I think it goes, or yeah, and goes through August 31st. So that's for all the CPA applications. And then our next meeting is going to be in September to kind of start our initial review of the application. So we're taking a couple months off.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really fortunate, you know, to have you there to kind of communicate to us. And, you know, Ben, of course, is really great about, if you got a question, he answers it. But to have a representative over there to sort of guide us, because I do really strongly believe in this, for instance, this fence project. It's got to get done. You know, the fence is a mess, and it's kind of an embarrassment. It really needs to be taken care of. So, and it does seem to me like the ideal CPC, CPA funding CPC project. So it'll be nice to have your, guidance going forward on that. Michelle, anything on pilot?
I unfortunately have nothing to report. We did lose one of our members, so we're unable to obtain a quorum. However, Patty Burns Fury is working with powers to be to see if we can either get more members or just saying that the quorum is 3 people rather than, I think it was 4. So we've been unable to achieve a quorum for any of the meetings.
So it's current members that it's you, Patty Burns Fury, and Kathy Cook. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And actually one of Patty's neighbors, one of the members has I don't know if it was a medical leave or whatever, but he's temporarily standing.
Okay. Great, thank you. Well, all right. Next,
I do hope to work with Patty though, privately, just to tally what we have so far. But
good. Good. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important committee, and if historical would take 2 people on it, I'd volunteer myself, but I think my plate is full. So I had elect officer for FY25 on here. Last year, we actually did this in July, and I was trying to get on the right side of the fiscal year when I was inspired to put this on the agenda, but it's 9:30. We're 2 people short right now, and so I'd like to table that until our next meeting, unless anyone is about to go out the window to get rid of me or something. Everything fine? We'll table that. Good. So approved meeting minutes of 5/22. I know Grant sent them out. I was so busy with this, trying to get all my ducks in a row for this sign stuff, that I just didn't get a chance to read them.
No worries. Apologies for sending them out late.
I think what we'll do, Grant, is I'll take a shot at them in coming days, and let's post them as draft, so we stay right with our friends at the clerk's office who are always so nice to us, and then we'll approve in July, and I'm sure that they'll be nice and forgive us. We've had a lot on our plates. There is no other business that I need to bring up. Do you guys have anything else you want to tell me about? Here comes the dog, Annie, right behind you. The dog's got something to say. Come on, Duke.
There's Andrew.
All right, we're almost done, Andrew. Tell him he's trying to corral Duke. Public comment. There's nobody here. I listen, I'm exhausted, but we got a lot done tonight. That water tower sign is a big thing, and 9 house signs is no small potatoes. So I hope you guys feel good about another, marathon. But with that, can we have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to
walk.
adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Michelle, second by Dan, roll call vote. Miller, aye. Annie,
Yes.
Grant,
Hi.
Michelle,
Yes.
Dan,
Yes.
5-0. We're out of here. Thank you very much. Hey, listen. 2 nights from now, right? Thursday night.
We'll
You
see
know?
you there.
This is gonna be a nice time, I hope. I just come out, we get to see each other in person for
Mhm.
once, you know? Drink some punch, eat some cake, I don't know, whatever.
You
whatever
know
I-
it's been a long time when I'm walking my dog and Kevin has to like pause and look at me and is like, do I know you? I
Yes.
think I know you.
Yeah, we had that running on Main Street. I was like, but you did a double take too. I did, was like, oh my
Yeah.
God, that's Dan. I mean, like, yeah, we've all aged,
All right.
Anyway, all right, I look forward to seeing you all Thursday night. I'm gonna have a good time.
Great.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Kevin.
everyone. Have a good night.
Have a good night, everybody.
See you, everybody.